Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Sum 41 called Order in Decline. So I think a lot of Canadians probably have a weird relationship to Sum 41. Hell, given this is the first time I'm talking about this band, I think pretty much ever on this channel, mostly because I would describe myself as a casual fan at best. Sum 41 is one of those breakthrough punk acts in the early 2000s that might have notched a couple singles in the US, but were damn near ubiquitous in Canada. To the point where when I went through an old greatest hits compilation, I was stunned how many songs I knew from memory. And again, only a casual fan. But that was the rub with Sum 41. For me, they've always been more of a singles band who drilled into some insanely catchy hooks and infectious energy more than any sort of consistent refinement, especially lyrically. And hey, you know what? A blunt wallop can be fine for a shot of adrenaline on the radio, or even a surprisingly ruckus crossover metal song. But Sum 41 also had a tendency to overreach into some ballads of questionable quality or political subject matter where the writing occasionally has more heart than focus. So when even Canadian audiences kind of lost track of them, I'll be honest, I didn't even notice they were gone. But by 2016, with the band now on an indie label, hopeless and long out of an obligation to court radio play, plus the return of their original lead guitarist to make them a five-piece act now, the band regained some critical attention on their album 13 Voices in 2016, which signaled a slow shift into a darker, more melodic hardcore and alternative metal-leaning sound that wasn't precisely great, but was more likable than I expected. And thus, when I heard that the group was getting even darker, even heavier, and more political on their newest album? Alright, look, it's always a little bit weird to see Canadian punks write about American politics, but apparently they weren't going to be snubbing some of the toxicity leaking in up here, so hell yeah, I was interested, especially given how the band didn't seem all that interested in coasting on nostalgia, and that's definitely promising. So, okay, I'm intrigued, a little bit stunned that I'm doing this, but what did we get from Sum 41 on Order in Decline? So I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little strange and probably a little bit negative, but trust me when I say I'm intending it as a compliment. This is a Sum 41 album that's best to experience knowing the band, but expecting nothing from them. Of course you will have heard that this is their darkest, their heaviest, and their most politically charged project to date, and on some level it is, but we're still dealing with Sum 41 here, where the writing is painting in broad brushes, the production is relatively blunt but also kind of thin, and while the heaviness is approaching a lot of metal territory, it's not quite gonna punch as hard as an album that fully commits to going metal, especially as I'm left with the lingering feeling that continuing to step away from pop might be forfeiting Sum 41's greatest underrated strength. And that's probably why, while I definitely like this album, more than I expected I would, I'm not quite loving it as much as some others are. Definitely good, very much a pleasant surprise, but not quite great, at least for me. But you know what, the funny thing is that this actually leads to a pretty straightforward review overall, at least at first, because Sum 41, they've been releasing music for around 20 years now, and they've tended to stick to a pretty consistent formula, albeit now being a five-piece and using the rhythm guitar to ramp up some of the heaviness. The leads, they're loud, they're fast, they're crunchy, right at the front with the occasional bit of effects tacked on. The grooves tend to be generally a little underweight, or a little bit more burly and developed at spots, which always tends to be the songs I like more here, especially considering that stalking swagger of Turning Away, or the spiky rollick of Heads Will Roll. And then we have Deryck Whibley's vocals. They don't exactly convey a lot of subtlety, but they've got genuine emotional range across a spectrum of distrust, rage, frustration, and some genuine sadness. And also the entire mix has that slightly bricked pop compression that's designed to intensify the broad wallop all the further in a very early to mid-2000s way, even on the ballads like Never There and Catching Fire, although bizarrely on not some of the more arranged elements used to flesh out the atmosphere, which is always kind of disconcerting. And you know what, I won't lie and say that the last case, the production, it's annoying, but it will likely never change. Whibley's been self-producing every Sum 41 album since Underclass Hero, and it's analogous to the same approach they've had in their heyday. And at the same time, it does help foster some of that broad immediacy and accessibility that's always been at the roots of of this band's appeal. At the same time, though, it's best suited to ramping up the pop-ready hooks, and with a few less of those this time around in favor of tones that owe a fair bit more to crossover thrash, a subgenre of metal for which I have had consistently mixed results. You know what, I won't lie, I would have preferred a greater sense of dynamics and texture and mix depth, especially considering Sum 41, they aren't the most wild or supercharged when it comes to real, raw punk fury. That might have been where the alternative metal side could have helped a little more, but most of those textures and tones were jettisoned altogether for something more direct and chugging and aggressive. That being said, this is also the sort of blunt formula that Sum 41 has refined with some veteran efficiency. So from the down-tuned muscle of Out for Blood, to the Muse-esque gallop on the New Sensation, to the incredibly kinetic drive of the People verses. So even when the band is dabbling with thrash, I can't say they're bad at it. And to the surprise of pretty much nobody, that same lack of subtlety, it does directly translate to the writing as well. And I'll admit to being a little bit disappointed that while we did get some of the obvious callouts of the current US political administration on 45 A Matter of Time, I do feel like we were cheated out of a good punk takedown of some of the malignant entities in Canadian politics. Granted, you can make the argument that given some of the blatant parallels between the radical edges of populist conservatism in Canada and the whole proto-fascism thing going on down south the border, at the broader writing style of Sum 41, it makes sense to make the parallels. The songs could apply to both. Songs like A New Sensation, Death from the Family, Eat You Alive, The People verses, they could be as applicable to the current president as they could be to the current Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, and his miserable and corrupt and crony-filled spree. But what's all the more telling is that Sum 41, they are canny enough to frame many of these songs not just as attacks, but also highlight the emotional and mental toll that the actions will take upon their constituency, highlighting the increased toxic state of mind that makes everything feel that much more bleak and worse, and all that more frenetic, hard to focus on things. Hell, it even leads to a strange sort of cohesion with the more emotional ballads that aren't as political, like the painful non-reconciliation with his lost father on Never There, or trying to process the possible grief if he were to lose his wife on Catching Fire. Yeah, in the latter case, you can tell the emotionality is messy or even at points incoherent, unable to handle that loss, but in a strange way, coming from Sum 41, kind of makes sense. But as I've mentioned my 3 Ps for good political art for years now, while Sum 41 definitely has the power and a lot of the populism, they don't really have much precision, and when you pair that with this style of production, it's hard not to feel like a couple of these songs have a little less weight than they should, even if they are bound to be not quite as dated by going broad and with less direct details. Kind of a mixed blessing there. But as a whole, you know, when I opened up this review, I called Sum 41 more of a singles act. Not just because the albums could be kind of uneven, but also because some subject matter could trend towards redundancy on those albums. And that's what happens when you don't exactly bring a ton of nuance to the table. You start repeating yourself, which is honestly somewhat true here too. But all the same, I can't help but think that Order in Decline is a more consistent and focused album that I've heard from Sum 41 in some time. Not really precise or cutting enough to be punk that I'll revisit time and time again, especially this year, and I do think they'd be well to integrate a little bit more of the poppier side in their composition, if only to put the hooks more over the top. Look at a band like Pup and their album Morbid stuff from earlier this year for a fantastic example of that. But you know what, for a fast, angry, and accessible listen, I see this maybe even being a shot in the arm for longtime fans, showing where Sum 41 could go from here. It opens up more potential than I certainly expected, and it's why I'm giving this a light 7 out of 10 and absolutely a recommendation. Generally likable, solid stuff. And while I don't expect it's going to get the same sort of radio play as they had in their peak years, it is catchy enough to pull me back all the same. So, yeah, you know what? Good stuff. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I gotta be honest, this album kind of surprised me. It's good stuff. Not quite great in my books, but I'll go back to some of this. And hey, if you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. You want to support some good Canadian punk, happy to hear from you guys more about this in the comments. And I got the poll up there. I was curious where the diehard Sum 41 fans will fall on this album, because I imagine it's a bit of a change of pace, although the reception seems to be pretty universally positive. Beyond that, if you want to debate me more about this, keep in mind I'm going to be at Con Bravo in Hamilton this upcoming weekend, from the Friday to the Sunday. So if you see me, hey, come say hi. I'm pretty open to that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for new episodes or even some old episodes of Billboard Breakdown, they're now on the second channel. Link in the card right here. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.